Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Folks, welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. I hope you and yours are well. Been another interesting week in Scottish politics and global politics, and we'll hopefully cover some of it that will grab your interest. I'm delighted to say we've got two new guests with us today. We have got Marjorie Tomlinson, who's an Alliance to Liberate Scotland candidate on the regional list in South Scotland, and Eamon Gallagher, who's an Alliance to Liberate Scotland candidate on the West of Scotland list. We have, of course, got our Eva with us. Mr. Boswell is somewhere. He hopefully might join us later, but if not, we'll do as best we can. So let's get ourselves started. Welcome, everybody. Eva, some interesting stuff coming out this week, and one of them was a lead in the Guardian, which is showing that with Plaid Cymru in Wales, the SNP, both of them with huge leads in the polls, and some questionable polls maybe over in Ireland, but it seems to be that the whole of the people stuck in this English Union are beginning to say Westminster no more.
Well, there's something very pleasant and very pleasing about being described as the Celtic nations. It really stirs your veins, doesn't it, and your heart thumps. I think we really began to notice this Celtic resurgence, if we call it that, taking off when Plaid Cymru won the Caerphilly by-election last year. Was it October or so? And that seat, they took it from Labour. It was Labour's first parliamentary defeat in Caerphilly for 100 years. Mm-hmm. A century of Labour MPs gone in a flash. The man who won it for Plaid was Lindsay Whittle. Fantastic scenes. But what's happened since then with Plaid is that their vocabulary slowly but surely has begun to alter, so that their leader is now using phrases like no more saying no to Wales, no more bending to Westminster will. That's quite reminiscent of Alex Salmond in the best days that Scottish politics has seen in modern political times. So it's good to see that the Welsh appear to be, in essence, on the march, and they look very much like going to be one day sometime soon voting to take back power and control of their resources into their own Welsh hands. Now, a slightly similar position had applied in respect to Sinn Féin, but they've had a wee bit of wobbles recently. They're still pretty popular, obviously, but there are some issues they need to address. But certainly in Northern Ireland, there seem to be moves towards a unification poll being held sooner rather than later. And you'll remember, of course, Roddy, that the Good Friday Agreement provides for that poll to occur every 7 years, because in Northern Ireland, the political generation is 7 years. And here we are, 12 years since our referendum, and we're still being denied that by Westminster. So when Westminster appears to be at its weakest, all the more reason for the parties in Scotland who genuinely support independence to have that united front and recreate the spirit and the ethos and the determination of the Yes movement, with a view to making this year's election Scotland's independence election. That's why the Alliance to Liberate Scotland exists, to put for independence back on the ballot and to give people the real cogent opportunity to elect a majority of independent supporting MSPs in May, particularly by making best use of the regional vote.
Well said, Eva. Ladies and gentlemen, for you listening and watching the podcast, my next door neighbour, who I call Mr. Power Tool, has obviously bought a new power tool this weekend. And so if you hear a lot of noise going off, there's really nothing I can do about it when I'm talking. Hopefully he will do his power tooling when I'm not talking. But Marjorie, one of the things that I find most encouraging in all this is not just that the support for independence is rising everywhere within the Celtic nations, but it's that the Unionists, their vote is disintegrating. There's a glass ceiling, I believe, of Unionist support, and it's now being spread out further with the arrival of Restore, with the arrival of Reform, with the arrival of Reform Party. So it's spreading further, giving them less of a foothold.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the Welsh example is interesting because for many years it was kind of seen as an elite middle class language party, but the masses, as it were, have been more and more able to come to terms with their identity as Welsh people as opposed to British Welsh or whatever. And I think part of that is to do with David Ewan and his anthem, Ymar yr Head, We're Still Here, which is a lot easier to sing than the Welsh national anthem, in which the English speakers are now singing at football matches. So that cultural aspect there is impressive. And my hope would be that despite the wobbly poll for Sinn Féin, that the three Celtic nations can say after this election, look, we have to talk about this collectively. Although Rune ap Yorwerth has been saying, oh, we won't ask for independence in the first term, we have to show that we can govern. So that my Welsh-speaking friends, many of whom were involved in the language movement, painting signs, going to jail, etc., they're becoming a little bit cynical about Plaid, and they're putting a lot of hope into Yes Cymru to kind of hold Plaid on that path.
Yeah. Eamon, it is heartening for us supporters of Scottish independence that independence parties everywhere in this union are gaining traction, and that the unions are falling by the wayside. But the most important thing for me is that both the main parties of England, the Labour and the Tory parties, they're really languishing in the polls. They're, everyone's disgusted with political parties in the main.
Yeah. The problem we've had recently is the SNP are quite happy with devolution, unfortunately, and the Greens, they love it. I mean, it's just the two of them just sit back and enjoy it. What we really need now is not more words. We need more action in the next Parliament, where we push for independence, not just talk about independence, because it's easy to talk about it and say, oh, this is what it will look like, but we need action. And that's where Alliance to Liberate comes in. It's not a case of just getting in and sitting there in a cosy environment and saying, oh, let's just all work together. Let's work together and push for independence, not just talk about it. And that's been the case for the last 5 years. The Greens have done absolutely nothing to push the SNP to deliver. And the SNP are quite happy with that. The two of them are just sitting there nice and cosy, as I say, and it's disappointing and depressing. In fact, I feel that we should have achieved independence in 2015 when the landslide majority for the SNP. But unfortunately, that was just, oh no, we can't do it. It's too early. It's too early. It's too. There's always an excuse. We need to stop the excuses. We need to change the whole dynamics and push forward rather than come up with more reasons why not. Leave the Unionists to come up with reasons why not. We should have the reasons to move forward. So that's my thoughts anyway.
You're on mute, Roddy.
Do I owe myself a quid now then, Eva? Is it? Yeah, the thing is that we should be asking people to justify the union. We shouldn't need to justify independence. That's absolutely the one. But there was 2 opinion polls out this week, Eva, and in both of them it showed that the SNP were going to have landslide victories. If I could stick first to the constituencies, if I may, I'll come on to regional and why SNP 1-2 maybe is not, in fact, is not the best way forward. But there's one poll showed around about 67, and another one I think was 69 seats. They're about 20 odd points ahead of Labour reform, and in one of them the Greens are actually in second place. This is unprecedented.
Well, what we have to bear in mind though is that support for independence is likely in excess of 50%. Yep. So there's 10-20% of independence supporters are not naturally now SNP supporters. And you also have to look at why is it that people would be voting SNP? Do they actually think the SNP leadership are determined to see independence? And in that regard, I was interested to see this week that Jim Fairley, the SNP MSP in Perthshire, had done a tweet about how many times the Scots had asked for a referendum since 2014. And he pointed out, and thereby hold the SNP campaign below the waterline. He said, since the 2014 referendum requests have been made by Scotland to Westminster in March 2017 after Brexit, December 2019 before leaving the EU, June 22 after the 21 Holyrood election, and in April 23 after the Supreme Court ruling. So he's pointing out that the SNP have requested a referendum at least 4 times, and thinks that somehow people are going to believe that if the SNP win in May and they ask for a 5th time, Westminster are going to say, aye, okay, on you go, chaps. You know, we say it every week, it's the insanity of doing the same thing time after time after time and expecting a different result. So that is precisely why the Alliance to Liberate Scotland exists, because we don't want to go to Westminster with a begging bowl. We want to see a majority of independent supporting MSPs of all stripes and a majority of the popular vote for independence, because these two strands together create international legitimacy, democratic legitimacy, because it's been a democratic election where people made it plain that they were voting for independence. The difficulty with the SNP is they don't have a plan B for when the request for a referendum fails. And interestingly, John Swinney's made a rod for his own back whether he wins or he loses, because if he wins a majority of SNP MSPs and he asks for a referendum and he's knocked back, because he doesn't have a plan B, he's failed. But if he loses, insofar as the SNP don't have a majority, is he then going to say, oh, well, I staked it all on an SNP majority, I didn't get it, therefore I can't ask for a referendum, so we're parked and stuck and marooned in devolution for another 5 years, watching fuel prices continue to rise, food prices rise, the continued proliferation of food banks, baby banks, school clothing banks, public service cuts, pensions amongst the lowest in Western Europe, you name it. That's what we're condemned to if the SNP either get a majority and don't get a referendum, as is likely, or don't get a majority and don't ask for one because they don't have the democratic legitimacy to ask for one. So one way or another, people should be waking up to the prospect of voting for 2 different independence parties where appropriate. There are 14 constituency candidates for the Alliance, and I'd strongly suggest that each and every one is worthy of a vote from every independent supporter in those constituencies. If you don't have one in your constituency, please seriously consider voting Alliance on the list, because for every Alliance MSP elected will remove from the list a Unionist, and it's a win-win. One Unionist out and another independent supporter in. What's not to like? Because we're all there for one reason and one reason alone: independence, nothing less. Independence, nothing else.
Absolutely, 100%. And here's the thing, as Eve has alluded to, Marjorie, you know, opinion polls the last 2-3 years have shown that there's over 50%, anywhere between 52 and 59%, I've seen in some polls, in favour of independence. And here we are, the SNP at 39, which is very high for them in recent times, but there's still anywhere between 15 and 20% more who are sitting at home going, I can't vote for you. I won't vote for you. The will is there. It needs unity, unification, and for time for us to play the system.
Well, I think, should we be lucky enough to get 3 or 4 of our leadership in, Craig and Eva and Tommy, along with the demand for immediate negotiation on independence, we should also be saying, let's get together with Plaid Cymru and Sinn Féin, because I think there's strength and unity. And again, despite the Donegal poll, at least it's encoded in the Good Friday Agreement that the people of Northern Ireland have a right for their settled will to be recognized. The whole thing with Swinney reminds me of the Cameron-Clegg coalition. I realized that, Cameron wasn't particularly fond of the far right of his party, so he probably preferred that coalition where, in his view, he didn't have to cater to the extremists. And I think that, you know, my personal joke is that Blackford and Pete Wishart will get peerages after this May election, and that Nicola will go to the Lords in December. She says she likes London, and I think that would be an interesting finish to all of their careers, because I think they've succumbed to whatever it is, the frippery and finery of being the establishment's good little soldiers.
Yeah, they've most certainly settled down, not settled up, as was famously once said. But here's this, Joe. Here's the projection on constituency seats, or the seats for the SNP. And every one of those seats, this is the lowest poll. There's another one that has them on 67. But all of their seats are coming in the constituencies.
Yeah, well, you know, I'm reminded of the Who song, "Won't Get Fooled Again." I think voters here are very canny. I think they knew what they were doing when they, you know, returned however many Labour MPs at the last general, because they wanted to give the Tories a bloody nose. But, you know, I honestly think, as Alex said back in 2007, finally, the Scottish people have given up the yoke of Labour mediocrity forever. I think that was like, you know, taking somebody back in a relationship that was never really going to work. And I think, you know, finally, hopefully the Labour Party will be seeing the back of them, because look what they did in Wales, you know, for 100 years. I remember going up to the Pontypridd constituency and thinking, this looks like Mexico: stray dogs, open sewage pipes, burnt out cars. And I think the whole country, when I say country, I mean the 3 Celtic nations and England, is very much starting to go down the tubes, and people can see it. Romania and Poland are going to have better standards of living than we are in 2030. I was in Poland recently, and it looks like they're already well ahead of us. The people look prosperous. The infrastructure doesn't look like it's crumbling and falling apart. And, you know, this country's been asset stripped.
Yep, absolutely. Joe, you know, we've said that, you know, the last 3 years, opinion polls have shown that there's a majority for independence, and it's there. And the SNP have positioned themselves as the only party of independence. And you know, you vote for us, we're going to get you independence. Here's their latest leaflet they've been putting out. Is there anything you notice about that, Eamon, that just for an independence party, you know, there's something missing, isn't there?
Yeah, it's depressing when you see it. The problem with the SNP is it's always this: we're going to ask, and they know the answer is going to be no, so it's dead easy to ask. They should be demanding. In fact, I mean, there was the EU referendum. Now, the UK didn't ask for a referendum; they just had one. There's nothing stopping the SNP, if they really want a referendum, having. There's nothing stopping them using this election as a referendum instead, or as a, you know, a way of demonstrating and supporting, saying, by the way, if you get enough votes or enough MSPs, that's it, game over, we're independent tomorrow. There's nothing stopping them. But the only thing stopping them is they don't want to get out of the comfy slippers. And that's the problem we've got. They're quite happy. Fuel prices are going up. People are going to food banks, as Eva said, all these things. And yet the SNP saying, oh, don't worry about it, just vote for us and we'll ask once more. Keep asking when you know the questions no is embarrassing, and that's continually. It gets to the point you just think, why am I voting SNP? Why? And if you don't have a reason, then what's the point? You know, that's basically why they lost to Labour, because they're losing ground, and yet they're not doing anything about it, because the top politicians have got a job for life, basically. So why rock the boat? Because, you know, it's only the people at the bottom of the boat that's feeling the wet feet. Anyway.
It's the people who need it the most, who are the disenfranchised the most, that you know, we need to get out and get voting. Eva, here's the thing: they're going to win all these seats, 39% projected. I accept an opinion poll, but they're going to win all these seats. And here is the doyen of unionism and number crunching, John Curtice. He's explaining in his article that the second vote for the SNP will result in exactly 0. And here's the tables from these polls. And if you'll notice there, ladies and gentlemen, this is the other poll I was talking about, Eva, where they've got, given them 67 seats on 34% of the vote, 29 the regional vote, and 0 regional seats, Eva. I mean, it couldn't be more obvious or plain that the SNP won 2, which they are promoting, and they're continuing to promote it when they know it is not going to result in a single extra seat. It is insanity.
Well, the beauty of the Holyrood system originally was supposed to be that it reflected democracy because it was proportional representation, and smaller parties, if they were becoming popular, were able to break through in the lists in a fashion that would have been impossible in constituency, where it's obviously still first past the post. But what you've got here is the SNP harkening back to Alex Salmond's famous victory in 2011, when the SNP did get a majority. But that happened as the result of a fluke. It's never going to happen again. It will not be repeated. And what we know from facts, not political opinion, but fact, is that in 2021, over 1 million SNP votes on the lists were lost. They ended up with 2 seats off the lists in total. And that's as good as it's ever going to get for them on the lists when they win most of the constituencies. And when they're predicted to win pretty well all the constituencies, the prospects of SNP list MSPs being elected are 0. So what you might as well do is rip up your ballot paper for the regional vote if you're planning to vote SNP in a region where they're polling as high as they appear to be. What you need to do is vote wisely. So if you've not got an alliance candidate in the constituency, you should be voting alliance on the list. And instead of electing unwasted SNP list votes, Unionist MSPs, you'll elect independent supporting MSPs instead, and have a real chance to have a majority of independent supporting MSPs in the Parliament. And what you would have with alliance candidates elected, and I think several of the SNP who would be elected would be constantly harrying the SNP leadership to force them to move on independence, not settling down, but talking about settling up, starting again to use the language that Alec used, holding feet to the fire, that kind of thing, but directing it against the SNP leadership deliberately and constructively to make sure that Scotland's voice is heard at every turn. And we're not lying down for another 5 years of that devolution dead end. Remember, George Robertson said that devolution would kill the nationalists stone dead. Well, in a way, he's right if those of us who support independence are prepared to allow the current SNP leadership to continue in the fashion that they're going. People need to be confident that when they elect their MSP, they'll do the job that they're offering to do, which is, from our perspective, do all that we can to deliver independence. And that is the raison d'etre of the SNP, and it's what they should be doing too.
Yeah. It's worth noting as well, ladies and gentlemen, that in 2021, in the constituency, the SNP took 47.7% of the votes. They have dropped quite dramatically, Marjorie, and there's a reason for that. And it goes back to that pamphlet I put earlier, is that they really are not seen by a lot of the independent supporting voters as an independent supporting party.
I've been up here now for about 4 years, but obviously, knew Alec when I was 27 and he was 29, and he and David Ellis Thomas were cooking up an informal alliance between Plaid and the SNP in Westminster. So I have been following what's been going on here with great interest. My view is that after 2007, the normal careerists that have always stalked the backbenches of the Labour Party, the Och Jimmy, Feeble 50, etc. I think they all joined the SNP because that's where the power nexus was. And I think, I know what's his name? Alan Smith is standing. I don't think Stuart MacDonald with his hotline to the Heritage Foundation is standing. But, frankly, whoever's in the leadership maybe must have been got at some years ago. And they're very, very contented and happy to just let things rot. And I think, that's what my Welsh friends are on the alert for, because with Apiarworth going, well, we're going to be in for 5 years and show that we can govern efficiently, and then we'll talk about independence the next time. They've got to stop dangling this carrot in front of people. And I think here, at least, we've got the alliance. And as I say, we need to link up at the leadership level with those people and try to collectively push and announce what we're going to do. I know Apiarworth wants to at least legislate for the possibility that the Senedd could hold its own referendum, and also he wants to get the money from the Crown Estate. Apparently the Crown Estate in Scotland does give that money back to the Scottish budget, but for example in Wales, all the castles and museums and things have to give that straight over to the monarchy. And that's, of course, another thing. I think people are becoming increasingly aware of how anachronistic having a huge parasitical royal family is.
Yeah, well, you won't get an argument with me on that one. I'm a die-hard Republican. On Joe, this is, not only did the polling and all show you and John Curtice, they did it by region. And if you go through every single region, the SNP are going to get 0 list seats, 0 in every single region. And they've done the figures on it. And yet there are still people within the SNP saying, vote SNP in the list as well. What are they Unionists or are they just stupid?
Probably both. I mean, even I was watching I caught the Tory party political broadcast the other day. The leader, I can't even remember his name now. He's just nondescript, but he's basically telling people to vote for the Tory party on the list. So they know that that's the way to get into power, and they know. And when they get into power, it's just sit back and keep the union going. And it's not about improving people's lives. It's just about keeping the status quo. They're happy. They've got a job for 5 years, and that's the end of it. We need to get in there and change the system. We've got Westminster set up. Westminster's system, the first past the post in England. They're happy for that, or happy for the UK to have that system. They gave us this system to try and keep us in our box, but we need to use the system as it is to get out of the box and to deliver independence and move forward. This at the moment it is absolutely spot on. That it is keeping us sort of tied down. Hollywood's too comfortable. You sit there and they all have a wee debate and nothing actually happens about fox hunting or something. I mean, very few people in Scotland actually go fox hunting, but that's the kind of thing that comes up all the time. And you think, God, if you actually had real powers, then you would be able to change people's lives properly, make for the better, rather than continually having food banks. It's embarrassing that we've got food banks in Scotland. We've got all that oil in the North Sea, we've got all that renewable energy, and yet fuel prices are going through the roof, gas, electric, petrol, diesel, everything. And yet people are just going, oh, it's okay. It's not okay. It's time it changed, and it has to change soon. And this Parliament should hopefully enough allies to liberate Scotland, get in and change it and really push the SNP, because otherwise they're just going to sit back for another 5 years and nothing's going to happen. It's now or never, or now or another 5 years time, and another 5 years time. It has to change, and it has to change at this election.
Indeed, and that's why you've all should be voting Alliance to Liberate Scotland in the regional list, ladies and gentlemen. But one of the other things even that come out on these polls is that the likelihood of the main opposition party is going to be the Greens. I mean, never have believed that either. But will the Greens, do you think, be the opposition, or will there be another coalition?
This is absolutely terrifying when you consider the debacle of the last 5 years and the dreadful influence of the Greens. I just can't even bear to go there again. Gender ideology, God save us. We've still got these court actions ongoing relative to gender ideology, transgender guidance for prisons, transgender guidance for schools, and this is this is all a diversion away from what we should be considering, which is what's best for the people of Scotland. And what's best for the people of Scotland is independence. And for all that, put this another way, the alliance exists for one reason alone, and that's to gain independence. So
Yeah.
I will not agree on every single point politically with very many of the other members in the alliance, but the beauty is we're there for one reason and one reason alone. And I think that if we can get Scotland over the constitutional question and people can vote on policies that are for the best for the country, then our country is likely to prosper very quickly. But what you'll find instead is, if the Greens are elected in the numbers that appear to be being predicted at the moment, you can expect more tomfoolery like there was the last time. So if the electorate desire independence and they need any proof of why independence is the right thing, they only have to compare and contrast what Eamon and I were saying about food banks and poverty and prices, contrast what's happening in Scotland with what's happening in Norway. Norway's oil fund is worth $2 trillion, 350,000 for every member of the population. Scotland hasn't got a penny of that because it's been delivered south, originally bankrolling Thatcher and continuing thereafter on, English infrastructure and Westminster's folly and illegal wars and such like. So the green issue should be terrifying too, because of the reliance on renewables and turning their face against oil and gas. What country other than Scotland discovered oil and became poorer?
Mm-hmm.
It was discovered by Imoko in 1969. I was 6.5 years old. I'm 63, and what's happened between then and now in terms of prosperity for the Scottish people was there was a bit of a boom, and now there's a bust. We've lost Grangemouth. We were supposed to get 1,500 jobs in Ardeshir, but we're not getting them because of Chinese spies. It's just beyond belief. So if you're an independence supporter, Green is probably the last vote that you should be doing, because Greens, remember, said independence is not a red line.
Correct.
So if you want independence, replace the Greens with the Alliance to Liberate Scotland, and you'll see a powerful force of people determined to see our country free, independent and self-determining within the next year or two.
Absolutely. What the Greens and the SNP have in common, of course, is that they only talk about independence every 5 years when it's election time. That's just the reality. We haven't actually, ladies and gentlemen, had an independence campaign since 2014. Nothing. And yet we're at 52, 53, whatever % in favour of independence. Imagine what it would be if we had an independence campaign, which is what Alliance to Liberate Scotland are trying to get going, is to get people behind it. But on this topic, Marjorie, will the Green Party, will they be an opposition, or will they be a partner to the SNP in the devolved British devolved Parliament in Edinburgh?
It's interesting to think whether they will choose a different tack than in the last Holyrood election. I've heard different things about why Humza blew up the agreement with them. Apparently, they were already thinking of doing it. I'm pleased, if we go back to the gender ideology issue, that the Olympic Committee has finally declared that men cannot compete with women. It took them long enough, but I do think that issue has been aired sufficiently so that, again, we can't be seduced by it. I don't know what other ruse they have, which could be eagerly collaborated in by the SNP leadership to keep pushing independence further and further away. It would be interesting if they became the official opposition. There is, as you say, Eva, the oil and gas issue, but I wonder whether seeing more of them might put more Scottish people off. In other words, in the past, they've only been elected from the list. a few times, and aside from the gender ideology thing, which was obviously huge and blew everything out of the water, if they got more exposure, people might not like them as much. Of course, for us, what we need, as I said, is a couple of our champions in there demanding independence. So I watched this space. I can't figure out whether they would be able to do another Butte House agreement or not. It depends. But I think, that again, if we elect a few people, they can poke holes in that very easily.
Yeah. Personally, and I've voiced it on here a few times, I'm quite happy, not for the people who are losing their jobs in oil and gas, but I'm quite happy the less we drill till we get independence. Why should we give any more of our wealth to a foreign country south of the border? And then when we do get independence, drill, baby, drill, as they say in America, drill. And let's take care of the problems that we've got. Eamon, what do you think? Do you think the Greens will be the official opposition, or do you think there'll be a partnership deal done between the two parties who have so much in common?
Well, the Greens can't tell the difference between a man and a woman, so God knows what's really going on in their heads. I mean, they go on about saving the planet, and then they allowed Grangemouth to close. Now, probably their argument is that they don't want oil at all. But if you don't have oil, then electric vehicles don't get off the drawing boards. You need oil to produce plastics, to produce lubrication. Vehicles don't just run on electricity. There's other things that come along. To dig the minerals out of the earth, you need heavy vehicles. These vehicles can't be electric because they've not got the capacity to deliver. The Greens have this fallacy that if you shut Grangemouth, then you'll stop producing oil. We need what's actually happening now is the oil's going all the way down to England and coming all the way back up again. But that doesn't make sense. It certainly doesn't make sense if that's what your idea is, that you want to save the planet. It just doesn't fathom it. But then, of course, if you can't tell the difference between a man and a woman, that explains why you would shut Grangemouth. They don't seem to have any joined up thought process. They all seem to be going in different directions. So what they'll do after the next election, no idea. Hopefully people will have started to see through them and see that the whole gender ideology thing is insanity. Men can't have babies, and that's just a biological fact. They can pretend all they want that if I self-identify as a cat, then I'm a cat. No, it doesn't work that way. You have to live in the real world. And unfortunately, all these carbon taxes just make people poorer and poorer. And we've got enough people going to food banks. We don't need any more. So people really need to look at the Greens and look at what they really are. They're not green, and they never have been. They're pretending green. And then when they get into power, it's all about tax, to the point where people are getting poorer and poorer, and more people struggle. And I don't know. They're just. I just wonder why people vote for them in the first place. Because if you look at their policy, they don't make any sense. They don't join up. They don't even make financial sense. That's my thoughts on the Greens.
Well, that's what some people don't realise. In fact, I saw it one day. Obviously, I can't list them all, but from oil you get 6,000 different products.
Exactly.
Plastic syringes, perfumes, every stamp, so many things. It's just incredible. But here's the other thing that's going on. People are saying, well, you can't. It'd be wrong to game the system, Eva. It'd be wrong. Only for one side, because here's our friend Russell Fittler, who are languishing, I believe, at 10 or 11%. He vows to give everything to stop the living nightmare of an SNP majority. How dare he? Never mind your politics, Eva. How dare he say he will do everything to stop the majority? If that's what the people vote, but they want to go against it, so they're willing to game the system. He said last week that he would be up to voting for Aaron Sarwar as First Minister if it meant beating the SNP. So to the people out there who support independence and say, "Oh well, I'm not going to game the system," wise up, you fools.
this is about party before country, and it's
Yeah.
one of the reasons why people are so scunnered with politicians. And I'm saying party before country deliberately because there is very little to choose between the Tories and the Labour Party now in terms of policies that they would impose upon us. I mean, the austerity, remember, read my lips.
Mhm.
There will be no austerity under Labour, and where are we? But it gets back to Unionists and dirty tricks campaigns. Remember in 2014, they said the only way that you could stay in the EU, for example, was by voting no. So what happened? We voted no and we left the EU against the democratic will of the people of Scotland who had voted to stay in the EU, obviously. So this always comes back round again to I'm all right, Jack, and how can I maintain my own favoured privileged position? So just though, as Russell Finlay would support Labour, you can bet your bottom dollar the Labour Party in the shape of Anna Sarwar will support Russell Finlay if the roles were reversed, because birds of a feather stick together. And at the end of the day, they are absolutely traditionally totally dyed in the wool Unionists, and unionism will always come first. It will always trump the will of the people of this country. That's why a succession of Tory prime ministers have refused a referendum. It's why Keir Starmer's indicated that he'll also refuse a referendum. You know, probably worldwide, political commentators and politicians understand that it's likely that if the people of Scotland had a referendum again, independence would win rather than staying within the Union. That's likely to be the general view worldwide. So I think that the difficulty here for Russell Finlay is he sees people from his party defecting to Reform. He sees his own little empire shrinking, and the way to expand his sphere of influence is to say that he'll sook into Labour and they'll all be nice unionists together.
Yeah. I had this last week, and it's worth going up against, Marjorie, because at the end of the day, you know what? Tories in red, Tories in blue, Tories in orange, and Tories in a lighter blue is just a fact. And they're willing to game the system to prevent a pro-independence majority. Surely we should act together to get a pro-independence majority.
Absolutely. And I think what this has exposed is a democratic deficit and the fracturing of the two-party system. And I think the reason people in the past have voted Green is they haven't really seen much else to vote for. All the others were quite heavily invested in Westminster. And to be fair, some of the English Greens are doing what one would have expected the Labour left to do, particularly around the war. But I would never have guessed, 10, 15 years ago that the Republican Party would collapse or be taken over by MAGA. There's nowhere for Republicans who were kind of liberal, maybe socially liberal, fiscally conservative to go anymore. And I think we're seeing the same thing in Britain. And we're also seeing the arrogance of politicians who might be elected on one particular platform, but then sort of say, I know better. When Eva was talking about Brexit, I remembered Kate Hoey, the fox hunting Labour MP for Vauxhall. Now, along with Scotland and Northern Ireland, the Vauxhall constituency in London was one of the highest votes to remain in the EU, yet she openly defied her constituents who had given her a cozy sinecure for near on 30 years. And then who promoted her to the House of Lords? The odious Johnson, who I will not acknowledge by his first name because that makes him sound cuddly and friendly, and he's anything but. But, he put her and Gisela, what's her name, from Birmingham, again, another Labour MP who was pro-Brexit, he put them into the House of Lords. So you see this kind of, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And somehow when they get either to Westminster or to Holyrood, they forget who put them there, and they forget that they are there to represent us. And they failed uniformly across all parties.
The thing is, we know that the Unionists game the system all the time. They're the seat in Angus, which is a possible Tory target, which is a laugh nowadays, but it is. Labour have parachuted someone in from the south of England, a councillor from Kent. They're not really making an effort at it. They're just filling a gap. And they do play it. And yet, the independent side seems to shy away from what we've been advocating, which is unity of us all. and, you know, maximising the independence vote. Surely that's the right way. If the Unionists are doing it, why don't we?
Well, that's the problem. We seem to have this. Oh, we'll be really nice, and if we're really nice, they'll give us another referendum. And if we're really nice, they'll give us independence. That's not how it works. I mean, if you look at any country in the world who's gained independence from an imperial master, they don't gain it by saying, "Oh, please, 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 let us go." They gain it by either by armed struggle or by a ballot or by just basically making it so awkward that the imperial master leaves and gets the message that they're no longer willing to work with them. And that's the only reason, that's the only way we'll ever get independence, is we start to think independently. It's a mindset. And this whole thing about being nice to your imperial master who's treated you like crap for 300 years, that mindset has to stop. We can't continually say, "Oh, but you know," and it's really, the independence movement is really nice and cuddly. The independence movement needs to move to the let's deliver. Let's not just be turning up with take my dog with me to the independence march, but it has to be more. The dog needs to a set of teeth and say, "Right, if I'm not getting independence, I'm going to bite someone." But you know, metaphorically, not literally. But it's that's the problem. It's been too cuddly, too let's do it nicely. Let's ask them. Let's stop asking. Tell them we're away. Bye. We're going. And then it may take them a few years to work out, by the way, they actually mean it. And that's where we need to be. This whole thing where we keep thinking that they're going to be nice to us. They've not been nice to us for 300 years. Why are they going to change?
I agree. The one thing I'm finding most of all actually is most of the attacks that are coming towards Alliance to Liberate Scotland are coming from the alleged independence movement, attacking your own, where the Unionists are all fighting together. We want to start doing that, folks. Let's get together. But one of the things they're pushing there's two things they're pushing. We'll come to ferries. I'll come to them in a minute, Eva. Mustn't forget the ferries. But, you know, we're getting a lot of talk about nuclear power. Scotland, you know, we've been told, oh, you get lots of jobs, like GB Energy, the 1,000 jobs we're going to get there. We're going to get lots of jobs from if we have some nuclear power stations that Scotland doesn't need, but England needs us to have. And it's come out in the wash that it's actually a London company, a PR company who's behind this movement, and who are pushing and promoting that, you know, this move towards nuclear power stations. And we'll come on to who they are exactly in a minute. I believe our Marjorie knows exactly who they are, and she's going to tell you. But this as well, Eva, you know, Anna Sarwar's nuclear plot, it would hammer our own people. Now, Sarwar knows that, and still he's promoting this London-endorsed nuclear power stations in Scotland. We don't need nuclear power stations, Eva. We've got enough renewables, oil, gas, hydro.
I was going to use choice language, but instead I'll just say Celtic.
Go for it.
Aye. Interestingly, Norway, to whom we alluded earlier, have ruled out nuclear power. I think there was another release from them about that during the week as to why they would continue to shy away from that. And we refer to them as a superpower in energy terms because they are. But in fact, so is Scotland. We don't need nuclear power because we've got energy resources from almost innumerable other assets. So my initial reaction was to think, well, if nuclear power is such a boon from a Labour Party perspective, why are they not just relocating or locating all the nuclear power stations in England? Could it be for the same reason that the weapons of mass destruction are not rammed up the Thames, but they're on the Clyde? Yeah. So I have a personal view to the effect that there are financial motivations likely to be continually uncovered that explain, as Phil says every week, follow the money. This isn't about what's best for the people of Scotland, not just because we don't need it, but because we don't want it. And our politicians ought to be doing what the people want and the people desire. So Marjorie knows much more about the detail on this than I do, but it's very, very fishy.
Yeah, it is. And there's a report from the Ferret, and I'm sure you can go into greater detail, but the boasting thing, this Britain remade Scotland forever nuclear energy. But but it's alleged that Retrade has close ties to the London-based public relations company called Stonehaven. What can you tell us about them, Marjorie?
When you first alerted me to this, Roddy, I did a little bit of digging and I found that not only did they have a huge number of staff, one of their big directors is a guy called Brendan May, who had his own company called Robertsbridge. And of course, I'm shocked that Brendan May is involved in this because he was, really big on the Marine Stewardship Council, Let's Save the Fish campaign. He was one of the early people that was into tree planting. But I guess like all of them, and some of them are too young for me to know about. I looked through all their lobbyists. Like all of them, they're in there for the big money. Now, as Eva said, they're not prepared to put weapons of mass destruction anywhere near England. They want to build nuclear power stations again in Anglesey because Traus-Vannes, which used to be the big nuclear power station up there, has been decommissioned. They're prepared to expose Scottish people to danger in a way that they wouldn't. Now, I first learned about the impact of Trident and the Holy Lock when the US was there with the Poseidon submarines. If they were to put weapons of mass destruction within a 5-mile radius of a major population center, they couldn't, because what the US does is an environmental impact assessment. They would be unable to do that themselves. And I think, we know that Trident is an independent. We know that it gets serviced in Kings Bay, Georgia, and that it's targeted by a Navstar satellite controlled by the Americans. It used to be in Nebraska. I'm not sure where it is at the moment. But that is not independent. And these power stations, the path of Brendan May and everyone else leads right back to EDF. As we know, EDF has massive contracts to build Sizewell C, very dangerous. And I can't remember the other one, maybe in the West Coast. Pardon? Hinkley Point. Yes, thank you very much. Anyway, aside from this unnecessary, costly diversion and how much money it takes, the state has to subsidize this. No private company will take that risk themselves. They're prepared to put that kind of money into Scotland to make us more exposed to radiation, but they're not prepared to put the money in to get rid of the food banks and King Charles prancing around in his kilt visiting them. I don't know why his PR people didn't see how bad that was. Aside from wanting to put, what is it, Britain remade, it sounds a bit dodgy to me. It sounds a bit like Britain first, and it could easily spill over into fascism. But, aside from these nuclear power stations that are proposed, people at the Ferret, along with retired Commodore Rob Thompson, have discovered that the Scottish government has already agreed to take nuclear waste from England. And they're not only just bringing up their nuclear waste, they're not even paying us to deal with it. So that'll be a huge cost to us on our fixed budget. And the person that is paid by the Scottish government to represent Scotland on this committee, secretive committee, is actually somebody from Suffolk. So, there is so much more to come out about this. And what I'm afraid of is, it will end up being all the same people that had to get up and protest against Dounreay, still a lot of radiation up there. All the people in Dunoon protesting against Holy Lock and the radioactive material left there. That's a big wake-up call for people. And I hate to think that we all have to go on the march again about that. And about the secretive nuclear waste disposal, probably, I guess, coming up from Sellafield/Windscale.
Suffolk them all, I say. Amen. But that, just talking of Hinkley, they're telling us all these jobs will be created and how wonderful it is. If I just look at the information on Hinkley Point C, which we're talking about, it was since 1995, it's over budget. It was originally budgeted to be 18 billion, not million, folks, billion. It's now at 35 billion and climbing. and it was due to be ready in 2015. It's now been pushed back to 2030. Now, they're telling us, well, you're missing out on this opportunity. It's not an opportunity. It's a bloody millstone round our neck, Eamon, and we don't need it.
Exactly. I mean, they closed down Ravenscraig, they've closed down Grangemouth. Everything that we were doing was relatively clean and environmental terms has been gradually taken away, and then they're going to give us nuclear. There's nothing green about nuclear. There's nothing nice or safe about nuclear. Weapons of mass destruction on the Clyde, where they'll determine that they're not going to put them in England, anywhere in England. I mean, even I think they've done a bit of research and they decided that the only place they could put them was down at, was it Southport or someplace like that? And then they decided that, oh, it was too dangerous because it was close to a populated site. The west of Scotland is the most populated part of Scotland, and yet we've got all these weapons just sitting there waiting just for something to go wrong, or somebody to drop something, and all of a sudden it's radioactive materials released into the atmosphere. It's crazy. But then of course we've always been the dumping ground. You know, if it's rubbish, put it up there, out the road, away from London, away from us, and that's the problem. We're not really considered at all, and yet as people will go, oh, but we need nuclear weapons to defend us. Defend us against who? Who are we defending? You know, the only country that's ever used nuclear weapons in history is America. You know, so are we defending against them? Because they're the ones with their finger on the button. I don't know. Let's pass talking about this.
But it's one of these talking subjects that they do, even. The other one that they're pushing very much, of course, is ferries. The terrible ferry. They don't talk about the Ajax fighting machine, which has cost about 13 billion and will never go into service. They don't talk about HS2 or the COVID app that they had. Oh, no, we don't talk about, or HMS Dragon that they sent to teach the Iranians a damn good lesson, had to turn back because it broke down, couldn't get Suzuki into the warm waters. But Caledonian McBrain felt obliged to put this information out. And we thank, I got this on Twitter, with thanks to AM McJ, whoever you are, my friend. But I tell you, that there's like 95% of all the planned sailings went ahead. If you were to listen to the Labour Party and the Tories, you would be thinking that only 5% of the ferries ever made it. And, a lot of the ferries that went, some of the 5% that didn't, because of bad weather, whatever, they pulled into a different port or somewhere else. But the reality is the ferries is just another big, it's just a big red herring that they love to roll out because they don't have actually anything positive to say or think about Scotland. But here's the other thing, before you answer that, Eva, here's the one that really got me. The Unions want to talk about ferries. What about this? That's true. The Isle of Wight is known the Canary Isles. But we don't talk about that, Eva, do we?
No, it's the same as Labour criticising the NHS in Scotland when it outperforms the NHS throughout the rest of the UK. It's party politics, and that's why people are switching off. That's why you've got voter apathy. It's why you'll see, for example, in local authority by-elections, sometimes the turnout has been as low as 20%. I wouldn't be surprised if the turnout in May is on the low side for a national election. And part of the problem with the ferries, though, the SNP made a rod for their own back. They mismanaged and mishandled that over and over again. We know this. The spectre of the ferries with the windows painted on is another one of these hugely embarrassing episodes that just shouldn't have happened. So I think what I really miss, though, and I think the people of Scotland started to enjoy and appreciate and now do miss, is the competent government that we did have in Holyrood for many years. There were a lot of good things that Holyrood was responsible for. One of them wasn't even Alex Salmond's SNP, but it was the smoking ban. That was a good thing. And then free prescriptions, university fees, whether it's the Queen's Ferry crossing or whatever. There's a multitude of achievements that the Scottish Parliament is responsible for. And what's really sad is that in the course of the last few years, we've seen government that at times has been less than competent. So it means that when they have made mistakes, the opposition, the Unionists, are able to jump on them and criticise them. And I think sometimes there have been difficulties in the media who've overblown and over-exaggerated some issues, sometimes beyond recognition. It's like hospital waiting lists. Yeah, some places they are too long and we all wish that they were shorter. But these things can only be adequately and appropriately and comprehensively addressed when you control your own purse strings. So our money goes south, we get a proportion of it back, and when, in essence, Scotland is skint in terms of not being able to pay for more teachers or police officers or social workers or mental health professionals, Westminster-based politicians, English parties, which Labour and Tory and Reform are, as are the Liberal Democrats, they point at us and in essence they sneer and say, look, you can't do it by yourselves. Look at the mess you've made of whatever is the chosen subject that week.
Yeah.
When the truth is, if Scotland were an independent country, our resources would be used for our priorities, and those would exclude some of the items that we're currently paying through the nose for, including defence, Trident, illegal wars, and everything that goes along with that.
Yeah. And we would make our mistakes, for sure we would. We wouldn't get it all right. But I tell you what, it'd be our mistakes and our decisions. But they are doing, Marjorie, this, the ferries, you can't be independent because some ferries didn't turn up in time. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous.
I think you just have to look at the fact that Scotland has had universal education much longer than any other part of the faux UK, and the contribution that Scotland's made in so many fields besides engineering. I was very surprised to learn when I was visiting Aberdeen last year that Aberdeen University alone had 4 Nobel Prize winners in medicine. Certainly one of the reasons I came up here to retire after being a British taxpayer for 42 years was that my father always spoke extremely highly of Scottish medicine, Scottish practitioners, Scottish researchers, because as a doctor himself, he had to keep abreast of developments and that sort of thing. And, I can say, having experienced the English and Welsh NHSs, that Scotland, what do they used to say in Glasgow? Glasgow's miles better. Scotland's NHS is miles better. And I would say that it's a bit like those polls showing, no regional seats for the SNP. Someone said, is that because they're actually trying to get people to do the votes 1 and 2? You have to wonder why certain things are being said and what the ulterior motive is. And I think it is to reinforce the cringe. It is to reinforce people's fears. But my belief is that the older generation that, still sings Rule Britannia is dying out. And that if we could just mobilize the young people, I guess 40% of them are not registered to vote. That's what we've got to be doing, is getting them to turn out. And we've got to be communicating that with them through, clever TikTok things with, dare I say it, the kind of panache that the Iranians have been doing their little Lego versions of Donald Trump with, which is, eye-catching, humorous. And we need to help give young Scottish people the same self-confidence and the same self-belief, which I think is now happening to young Welsh people. I mentioned earlier about the football. That's an important thing. And you all have already had, more big famous bands, more big famous authors, known to the English speaking world. There is so much that's positive about Scotland, and we just obviously don't see it in the Unionist owned media.
No, we never will. They own the television stations and the newspapers, that's why. But here is, Eamon, from the point of view of the Labour and Tory party, who are languishing at the lowest they've ever been, their only policy is SNP bad, Scotland bad, independence bad. It's the ferries, it's your NHS, blah, blah, blah. And they're falling in the polls. Now, rather than even save their party, they're willing to sacrifice everything to keep Scotland under the English hegemon.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's that's all they've really got. They've not got anything positive to tell us about the union. I mean, granted, since Nicholas took over the SNP have really all the things that Eva mentioned. You know, the Queensferry crossing and you know, free education. All these things all happened under Alex Salmond's watch.
Mm-hmm.
Since Nicola took over, I think it was food, baby boxes, and I can't think of anything else that she actually. And if you think she was in power for almost like 9 years, and that's the only thing I can think of that she actually done. The ferries have been a disaster for some reason. I heard stories that a certain politician kept changing the plans. Now, one thing I've learned years ago, when you're building a house, you come up with a plan and you start building it. You don't change it halfway through. You start changing it halfway through, the builder says, oh, that'll be another £1,000, oh, that'll be another £2,000. And then, well, that can't be done, so we're going to have to change this and that, and it's going to be £10,000 more. So by the time you finish it, you end up with something that doesn't quite look like you started off with, and isn't even fit for purpose. And you go, well, maybe I should have stuck to the original plan. That's the problem with the ferries. They kept changing the idea. Oh, we'll make it a foot longer, we'll make it a foot wider, or we'll put windows here, windows there. And you're going, just draw the thing out and build it and move on. Ferguson Marine didn't just suddenly become bad at building ships. I mean, they've been doing it for a long time. It's the people at the top who've decided, oh, we'll change it a wee bit and we'll add in, we'll put the toilets here, or we'll put 3 toilets here for the so many agendas that they want to come up with. But you have to come up with a plan and stick to it. And then the figures don't end up like the sort of Westminster. They're building a tank and it's so many billions over. Build it and leave it and move on. But to say that they just didn't seem nothing seemed to change since Nicola took over, and the other two that have taken over since then, useless as I call him, he didn't do anything either. I mean, he done nothing. And the man that's in just now, I won't even mention his name, but it's depressing that nothing actually has moved forward since the referendum, and yet it should have been. We should be independent by now, and yet we're still talking about independence rather than living it.
Absolutely. One other thing about the Caledonian McBrain were all appointees. Most of them work out of London. There's not a single islander on the Caledonian McBrain bid, and we've covered it with a few podcasts with Stuart Ballantyne, who has a plan, and certainly someone that we should utilise post-independence to get things sorted. But with the clock's beating us as always, Eva, happens every week. There are a couple of things I'd very quickly, ladies and gentlemen, like to cover. Now, I've lived long enough to see some things that I just wouldn't have believed. But I've got to say this week, this was an international matter, but it got me. And I had to go and check because I thought it was a wind-up. And I thought maybe it's an April Fool late. And it was this one, Eva, that the Pope Leo was attacked by Donald Trump. They summoned the papacy to the Pentagon and then threatened them with the Avignon solution. If those who don't know, in the 14th century, the French were not happy that the Pope had appointed someone else as the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, and they kidnapped the Pope and took him to France and made him a puppet of France. They apparently threatened him similarly. I can't believe it, Eva.
Yeah, you can. What seems to have happened is that the Vatican, a speech made by the Pope, Trump considered to be unduly critical of him and his performance. And the meeting that took place thereafter between Trump's envoy, in essence, and representatives of the Pope was described as being tense and aggressive. Imagine getting aggressive with the Pope's envoys when the Pope, quite properly, will have been critical of Trump for all the right reasons. Quite astonishing, really, but just a mark of how very low the presidency has sunk. And remember, last weekend there were rumours that Trump was in hospital. And then a few days later, he did that horrific tweet where he said that a civilization was about to end. And then there's a volte-face and there are supposed to be negotiations surrounding the potential for peace talks. Marjorie will have a view on this. Mine is that what Trump needs, rather than an audience for himself with the Pope, he needs a straitjacket forthwith.
Well, he needs a good kick up the arse. Is what my mother would have said. A good kick up his arse is what he needs. Marjorie, did you ever think in your life, I know you've lived out of America for more years than you've lived in it, but did you ever think you would hear of an American president and a presidency threatening and trying to blackmail the papacy?
Well, it's blasphemous. He's got this weird religious fundamentalist woman that comes in and lays hands on him, and then they all pray. The moronic Barbie doll press officer bounced into a press conference the other day and said, "Did you hear amen coming through? We were all just praying with the president." This is blasphemous Christian Zionist nationalism. The idea that he's being compared to Jesus on Palm Sunday, riding in with the donkey. My jaw has never really left the floor. As I said on that show, what was it? Scotland with Alex Salmon, which kept going a few months after he passed away. I said, I blame Marianne McLeod of Stornoway. She did not teach him the word no, and she did not teach him to share with others. I think that he is in not just the early stage of dementia, but the way he falls asleep, the way he talks in non sequiturs, the way he passes wind 11 times without apologizing to leading oil company CEOs, and then wanders off to look out the window to look at his ballroom, which a judge has actually stopped, saying, you're a steward of the White House, you're not the owner of the White House. I mean, it's a nightmare, and I agree with the straitjacket option. People say, well, J.D. Vance would be even worse. I'm not sure. I don't think that he has the grip on the populace the way Trump does, but I'm no longer a citizen, by the way. I gave that up in 2018. I feel very, very sad. And when we hear him talking about eliminating Iranian civilization, our media did not use the N-word. To me, that meant he was thinking of using nuclear weapons to wipe out the Iranian populace. And I couldn't believe the lack of a sense of urgency amongst people. And all I could do was really hope that, hope that the military remembered that their allegiance is to the Constitution and not to him, and that somebody sensible would prevent that happening. And it does seem that more steady voices prevailed, at least that night. But we live on a knife edge. It's appalling.
Yeah. I mean, I just one thing I would critique I'd put up, but 11 times farting without apologising. What's wrong with that? I thought we all did that. And I mean, compared to Jesus Christ, I mean, I know when I hear the word Donald Trump, I go, Jesus Christ. So, I mean, I get these two things. They kind of tie up together. But, Eamon, did you ever think in your life you would hear of any politician of any country threatening the Pope?
No. It's bizarre. I mean, have they discovered oil in the Vatican or something? What's it?
Maybe they are bringing a bit of democracy.
It's like I feel sorry for the Americans. It's like they've elected this cartoon character, and it's like a comedy, but it's real work. It's real life. This guy's in charge of 300 million people's lives, and I don't know. It doesn't seem to be getting wiser as the years goes on. He seems to be getting crazier. I mean, his first term, he never attacked any countries. He never started a war, which is quite unusual for an American president. This time he's even having a go at the Pope. It's bizarre.
He's probably, after he stops the war and agrees a peace deal with Iran, he'll be asking for a Nobel Peace Prize, no doubt. I mean, the guy's bonkers. But the clock is beating us, ladies and gentlemen. But there's one, I've just got to put this up because this had me howling this week. I don't know if you saw this story, and it's not for a question, but this was the one about the manager of Scotland's first alcoholic-free bar, done for drunk driving. I was laughing for about 20 minutes reading that. Only in Scotland could you get away with that one. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, there's a couple of other things I wanted to cover. But as always, the clock beats us, time beats us every time. Can I just thank our two newbies to the show, Marjorie and Eamon, very much for being here. And Eva, and of course, we don't know what happened to Mr. Boswell. We'll give you an update later when we find out where he is. I would imagine lying somewhere sleeping, but that's him. But till we see you again, may you and yours, please take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.